either. I'm trying to explain a new way of thinking about the war between the savers and the speculators, actually abandoning that idea in favor of a new idea, the war between free money and money within the realm of control of the banking system. And why I'm talking about this is because I think that the war between the savers and speculators basically doesn't leave you a choice to go outside the banking system. And it also advises you to do something that you should never do with fiat currency, which is save it. First of all, if you are a saver, then you're always putting it in a bank account and hoping to get an interest rate on that, a fixed rate from a bank. And that's always a lower rate than the banks will charge you if you want to borrow it. So net, that will draw money back into the banking system and disown you from disown society from free money, from the money that is without any claim. And that's a bad thing. That's what I'm talking about. That's the war that you're actually in. The other thing about it is, of course, that saving in itself is not wise to do with fiat currency. Fiat currency is not meant to be saved. It doesn't have any meaning outside actual transactions. If you put $100,000 in a cupboard, you save it, but then a year later you never know what you can buy. There can be a big disaster and nothing can be purchased with the whole money because it's fiat currency, it's paper, it's worthless. So you have no bargaining power if you hang on to it, if you keep it outside the system and think that you can use it later. You should never try to do that. You should always try to buy something that you can actually barter, that you can actually use in economical traffic. So I would ban saving fiat currency. I would simply not allow it. So those are two things. First of all, that you stay within the banking system, which is bad for free money. And second of all, that fiat currency is not supposed to be saved at all. Puts a hole in the whole savers versus speculating meme. But there's another reason where you can say, well, thinking about the situation as the war between basically owned money and free money explains more of what's happening at the moment. Because banks are not lending, for instance, while there is low interest rates. And you might wonder, why are they not doing that? Well, it's very clear that they can never, of course, lend out money at zero interest rates, because that would create free money that can be out there for years and years and years because there's no interest rate. So they would be killing themselves, the banks would be killing themselves. They would be depriving them from people with the need to borrow money, because they would bring money into society, liquidity into society that's simply out there. And that would be if they would basically put through the zero interest rate that they themselves have to pay. So they would borrow from the Federal Reserve, they would give it to you at zero interest rate. And even if they do that multiplied by the whole fractional reserve banking thing, it would still be bad for them. They would still put out 100 times as much money, or 10 times or 30 times as much money as they are themselves borrowing at zero interest rate. But they would not earn anything from that money. And they would be not safe they would not be able to expect that money to be returned to them. And that's bad, because then you get what they don't want, what banks don't want, is there to be pools of money in society that can operate on their own. Because then you can basically have satellite economies. Which happens, of course, if you, for instance, start printing your own money, or if you start marking dollar bills or putting them in a database and you circulate them only locally. That's you can do with free money. But now, even if they charge the interest rates on what money they borrow out, I said in the other video, they have to make sure that they charge such an interest rate that they compensate for the write-offs that they have to make. Because every time they create $100,000 or something like, they borrow it into society, and the person borrowing it goes bankrupt, you have another $100,000 circulating in society with no interest rate claim on it. That's not going to be sucked back into the system if the bank has to write it off. So they have to compensate for that. So they have to charge interest rates which are consisting of their own costs plus the write-offs that they're making, in order to maintain their superiority in the game. See, and now I think it's more clear why they are not lending. because they don't want to play the game if it means that they're destroying their own self. Because the more money that's in society that is freely there, that there's no claim on it in terms of interest rate, that can be used outside the banking system without anybody knocking on the door and saying, hey, part of that's mine and I want it back now, which they can do if you put it in a bank account, and they can simply charge fees and whatever they do. The more money is out there, the less power the banks have. They lose their power, and the less power they have, and the more power is drawn into that the independent systems, let's say, the more the banks will go bankrupt. So it is a battle that once you skew the balance towards money being free and without claim, let's say, in society, once it is going that direction, the banks have to stop lending. They have to hold the horses. And now, surprise, surprise, what we have now is, of course, a case of immense impending write-offs, but also ongoing write-offs, these mortgages. And the funny thing is that, if you put the battle on the border between you and the bank, so there's a person going to a bank, he borrows money, and then he defaults. That's one person, and the bank can be against you and say, well, you're a stupid citizen, and now your family will be in debt, and your family's family will be in debt to the 7th generation, and we'll curse you, and etc. And we'll get that money back because we want to have our superiority. You can't have money without us banks lending it to you with interest rates. That's the game. We have to own you. They can say that to you, but can they say that to other parts of the financial sector? And what happens if people in the financial sector, so you have, let's say, a tandem of, I am a mortgage owner, I have a mortgage with company A that has sold it to company B, has sold it to company C, and you can read right now in the news that these companies are telling each other, we're not going to identify you, we're not going to give you a note that maintains the debt. That's what it means. We're not going to identify you, so that means that if you have to take a loss, you cannot come to me. If financial institutions do that amongst each other, and it's let's say a little bit away from you as a citizen, that's fantastic, because that means that the banking system is imploding on its own, and there's more and more money freeing itself into society without there being any pressure on the citizen to do something. That's what it means to make a mistake with your whole mortgage papers, that you are starting to hemorrhage money into society, free money, where there's no claim on that money. I have to repeat it a lot, I'm sorry, because I still haven't found a word for it. And free money, of course, is not free. You have to work for it. But what I mean is that the power of the banking system is waning on society as a whole, as they are taking losses. And if they are taking those losses internally because they're telling each other, I'm not gonna keep a debt on my book because you want to. I'm simply not gonna do that. Of course they won't, because they want to stay alive. They want to keep in the business of being a bank. But if they do that, they're every time somebody does that, every time one institution says to another institution, "I'm not going to indemnify you," in the end you'll have to take a loss. Society becomes more and more sovereign in their control of their own destiny and their economy. They're no longer, basically the banks are losing control. If they do that to a tune of $45 trillion or whatever it is, then there comes a point that you really don't have to worry about the banks anymore, because there's enough cash money floating around in the hands of people that you can run your economy on. The only thing that people need to do, or that really helps, is to not keep money in banks, because that will simply quicken the rate at which they go bankrupt. That will quicken the rate at which money becomes free money, because some of the debts that these banks hold on their books will be written off. And every time that happens, it's good. So the war is not between savers and speculators. The war is between the free money and the owned money. And the way to free money is to make banks go bankrupt, get your money out of the bank, and not repay your debts to banks. and then this whole mortgage fraud thing is a really helpful thing.